What if the story you learned was never the beginning at all, but only the thin outer shell of something far older, deeper, and deliberately hidden? What if the comfortable version of ancient history, lined with clean timelines and tidy explanations, was crafted not to inform you, but to protect you from truths that once terrified entire civilizations? Beneath the surface of our oldest scriptures lies a world far stranger than myth, a world where cosmic rebellions reshaped the earth, where forbidden unions birthed monstrous beings, and where entire cultures fought to erase the memories of events they could not control. These fragments, banished books, outlawed revelations, suppressed visions, were never meant to be read together. Yet when you place them side by side, they form a pattern too precise to dismiss, too provocative to ignore, and too dangerous for the keepers of official history to tolerate. And if even half of what these ancient writers witnessed is true, then the world before the flood was not a metaphor, but a catastrophe so vast it scarred the collective memory of humanity forever. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself and let's dive in. There are stories that enter our world like cracks in a stone surface, thin, almost invisible, but carrying the memory of forces powerful enough to reshape entire landscapes. The accounts preserved in the ancient forbidden texts do not whisper about simple misbehavior or moral decline. They speak of an age when the boundaries between heaven and earth were porous, when beings of immense authority crossed into the realm of mortals, not as distant observers, but as trespassers driven by desires they could no longer restrain. And though later generations tried desperately to hide these memories, to reduce them to allegory, or to lock them behind the walls of orthodoxy, the echoes remain strong enough to disturb even now. Because when the ancients wrote about the collapse of the world before the flood, they were not describing a symbolic purification. They were recounting a catastrophe that felt as real to them as the sun, the soil, and the breath in their lungs. The earliest warnings emerge from the story of the Watchers, celestial guardians whose duty was simple: to observe humanity without interference. For ages they honored this command. But something shifted within them. As they gazed upon the daughters of men, desire eclipsed obedience, and in an act that would fracture the balance of creation itself, 200 descended upon Mount Hermon, swearing an oath of mutual damnation, a bond that none could break without betraying the others. They chose human wives, not out of compassion or kinship, but out of an ancient hunger the heavens had never permitted them to feel. And from these unions came beings whose size, appetite, and presence defied the laws of earth. Creatures far too immense to belong to the world of humans, yet far too grounded in flesh to remain in the realm of spirits. The giants were not glorious demigods, as later mythologies would romanticize. They were predatory forces of nature, consuming forests, fields, livestock, and eventually the people themselves. Entire valleys became wastelands, stripped bare by their hunger. Villages vanished overnight, leaving behind only fractured pottery and crushed beams where homes once stood. And when the giants exhausted the world of ordinary sustenance, they turned on each other, tearing and devouring in cycles of violence so extreme that the earth was said to tremble beneath their feet. The ancients believed the planet itself cried out in agony, unable to bear the corruption spreading across its surface. Yet physical devastation was only the first consequence. The Watchers, in their rebellion, did something even more dangerous. They shared knowledge humanity was never meant to wield. Metallurgy not for crafting tools, but for forging weapons capable of organized killing. Cosmetics not for beauty, but for seduction and manipulation. Astrology and enchantments that claimed to decode the movements of the heavens, bending them toward personal gain. What should have taken thousands of years of gradual development erupted overnight into a chaotic burst of technological and spiritual acceleration, like a child suddenly handed fire and taught to use it not for warmth, but for destruction. In the worldview of the ancients, this was not progress, it was contamination, an intrusion of cosmic power into a fragile young species still struggling to understand the simplest laws of survival. Into this crisis stepped a single human figure, a man barely mentioned in the official scriptures, yet described in the forbidden texts as one who walked with beings beyond the world. Enoch. Not a warrior, not a king, but a messenger tasked with carrying a verdict from heaven itself to the rebellious Watchers. In a world collapsing under the weight of giant appetites and corrupted knowledge, he was chosen to travel through realms no human had ever entered. Guided by celestial forces, he ascended through layers of heaven, witnessing vaults of snow and storehouses of lightning, celestial gates through which the sun and moon passed, and the foundations upon which creation was said to rest. Whether these visions were cosmic metaphor, symbolic architecture, or the literal world view of an ancient mind confronted with the vastness of existence, their purpose was the same: to warn that the unraveling of the world had already begun. The decree delivered to the Watchers was uncompromising. Their offspring, the ravenous giants, would be wiped from the earth. Their spirits would wander restlessly, never belonging to heaven nor earth, and they themselves would be bound in deep places until the final judgment. But the destruction of their works required a far greater act. The world they had corrupted would have to be reset, not patch-repaired, not cleansed with drought or famine, but submerged under a flood so immense it would return creation to the state before boundaries were formed. A planetary cleansing, not motivated by wrath alone, but by the need to remove a stain woven too deeply into the flesh of the world to be excised in any other way. Centuries later, the shadow of this cosmic corruption appears again, but in a far more intimate form, where the Watchers acted on a celestial scale. The story of Adam and Eve after Eden unfolds in the smallest details of human suffering. Cold air on bare skin, hunger for the first time, fear when the light fades, uncertainty about how to survive a single night outside the garden. These ancient texts do not portray them as serene figures walking calmly into exile. They show a pair of fragile beings thrust into a world that felt hostile, unpredictable, and overwhelming. When the sun set for the first time, they thought creation itself was dying. In the darkness, they fell to the ground in despair, believing they had been abandoned to an endless void. This psychological terror, raw, primal, immediate, stands in stark contrast to later polished narratives. Here, Exile was not philosophical. It was a trauma. What followed was not simply adjustment, but a descent into grief. They found a cave, a hollowed refuge at the base of a mountain, and claimed it as the first sacred space outside Eden. They filled it with the small relics they carried from the garden: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These were not symbols of wealth, but reminders of a paradise lost, tokens meant to echo forward into a distant future. Through them, the forbidden texts draw a line stretching thousands of years, connecting humanity's first tears to the gifts laid before a child in Bethlehem. A thread suggesting that the fall and the promise of redemption were not separated by eras, but by the turning of a single long page. But even here, in a cave far removed from the cosmic rebellion of the Watchers, the force that sought humanity's destruction had not given up. Satan appears in these stories not as a serpent whispering simple temptations, but as a relentless manipulator intent on driving Adam and Eve to annihilation. He disguises himself as an angel of light, leading them toward cliffs under the pretense of divine forgiveness. He appears as an old man, a young woman, anything that might slip beneath their emotional defenses. His goal is not mischief, it is extinction. And each time Adam and Eve nearly fall for the deception, they glimpse the cost of believing comfort without discernment, a warning framed not as doctrine, but as a psychological struggle every person eventually recognizes in themselves. When children are born into this fragile new world, the story turns from cosmic tragedy to human drama. Cain and Abel are not alone. Each one, the texts say, was born with a twin sister, a detail that reorients the entire early narrative. Beauty, envy, entitlement, and desire weave through their relationships long before the infamous sacrifice. Cain lusts after the twin who was born with him, but in an effort to prevent corrupt patterns, Adam and Eve decree that each son should marry the twin born with the other. This decision, while rooted in the logic of an ancient lineage, ignites a fury in Cain deeper than religious jealousy. His offering of withered grain was not merely an act of defiance, it was a statement of wounded pride, a protest against a world that seemed to conspire against his desires. When Abel's offering is accepted and his is not, the rejection becomes unbearable, an insult from heaven layered upon a personal betrayal he could not forgive. The murder that follows is portrayed not as a sudden outburst, but as the culmination of an inner storm. And the aftermath is stranger still. The earth refuses to swallow Abel's blood. Again and again Cain tries to bury him, but the ground spits the body back out, as if creation itself rejects the act. Adam and Eve do not understand death. How could they? Their grief is not shaped by acceptance, but by confusion. They take Abel's uncorrupted body back to the cave of treasures and mourn over it for 7 years, unable to process a reality that had never before existed. It is here, in this vigil of sorrow, that the forbidden texts suggest the true beginning of humanity's fracture, a pain deeper than exile, deeper than labor or toil, a pain inflicted not by the heavens, but by one human upon another. Generations pass. Seth is born. His descendants live in disciplined purity on the sacred mountain. Cain's descendants, in the valley below, sink into indulgence, violence, and excess. The pattern mirrors the earlier cosmic tragedy. Two groups separated by lifestyle and desire, one devoted to harmony, the other consumed by earthly pleasures. And just as the Watchers were drawn to the beauty of human women, so too are the sons of Seth, drawn down the mountain by the allure of the Canaanite daughters. Music, adornment, and celebration become the tools that break the final boundary. The two lines mix. Corruption spreads. The world falls again, a human echo of a celestial mistake. By the time the texts shift their focus to the 12 sons of Jacob, each offering deathbed confessions that peel back the psychological layers beneath the familiar stories, the pattern has already been established. Humanity is shaped by cycles of desire, betrayal, revelation, and renewal. Reuben confesses the sickness of lust that clouded his judgment for months. Simeon speaks of jealousy so corrosive it nearly consumed him. Levi recounts visions of cosmic order and priestly destiny. Judah admits the intoxicating dangers of wealth, power, and wine. Joseph embodies the possibility of forgiveness even in the face of betrayal. These confessions feel less like ancient admonitions and more like windows into emotions still recognizable across thousands of years. The forbidden texts do not sanitize the patriarchs. They expose them, flawed, haunted, reaching for truth in a world where divine presence feels both near and impossibly distant. And beneath all these stories, giants, watchers, exile, murder, prophecy, runs a single haunting implication. Humanity has been navigating the consequences of celestial interference, moral failing, and fractured understanding since the beginning. Nothing about our world was simple. Nothing about our origins was clean. The comfortable narrative presented in schoolbook timelines collapses under the weight of these older accounts. Whether taken literally, symbolically, or somewhere in the vast space between, these forbidden writings insist on one point with relentless clarity. The past we were taught is far too small to contain the world our ancestors remembered. There are moments in the surviving ancient writings where history seems to fold in on itself, as if the storytellers were trying to preserve something too vast for their language, too disruptive for their age, and too subversive for the institutions that would later curate the official record. As new generations inherited these texts, whole chapters were copied, altered, reframed, or quietly removed, leaving behind a patchwork of narratives that still pulse with an energy that suggests something deeper was being communicated beneath the surface. When the forbidden writings turn to the era of the patriarchs, the foundational figures whose names echo through the world's spiritual traditions, they do not present them as perfect icons suspended above human frailty. Instead, they show families confronting destiny, temptation, anger, guilt, and visions of forces moving just beyond the visible world. And tucked between these confessions and revelations lies a quiet revolution in how ancient people understood time, order, and the hidden architecture of divine intention. This becomes unmistakable in the text known as the Book of Jubilees, a work that does not merely retell the early stories of Genesis, but rewrites them with a zeal for precision that borders on obsession. It claims to reveal the version of creation that Moses received directly from a heavenly messenger during his 40 days on the mountain. Not the simplified public account that would be recorded in Genesis, but the classified briefing, the unfiltered chronology, and the cosmic logic behind humanity's unfolding narrative. Every event is placed within a calculated grid of years, cycles, and jubilees, periods of 49 years structured like celestial gears turning in coordination with divine intention. According to this text, nothing in human history happened accidentally. Births, migrations, covenants, wars, and revelations followed an intricate rhythm, a cosmic metronome keeping time with the heartbeat of the universe. For the ancient writer who produced this book, mathematics was not a human invention. It was a signature of divine order etched into the bones of reality. And so history itself becomes a series of measurements, 7-year cycles, 49-year jubilees, and a 364-day calendar that was said to reflect the true solar pattern inscribed on heavenly tablets. This calendar offered exactly 52 perfect weeks every year, a system so orderly that festivals, sacrifices, and holy days would always fall on the same weekday. To its author, this was not merely convenient, it was essential. Any deviation, such as the shifting lunar-based calendar used by the priestly elite in Jerusalem, represented corruption, an abandonment of the rhythm woven into creation. To follow the wrong calendar was, in this worldview, to fall out of alignment with the cosmos itself. But this obsession with order also served a political purpose. The period in which Jubilees was written was marked by turbulence, foreign rule, cultural assimilation, and disputes between religious factions. By grounding its claims in the authority of Moses and the voice of a divine messenger, the book attempted to impose a unified structure on a fractured world. It transforms the patriarchs into models of perfect obedience, erasing their weaknesses, smoothing their inconsistencies, and portraying them as early practitioners of laws that would not formally exist until centuries later. In this retelling, Abraham celebrates festivals that historically arise long after his era. Jacob observes commandments that had not yet been given. The past becomes a curated mythic foundation upon which the author's present-day community could build a sense of legitimacy and divine favor. Yet woven into this revisionist history are strange fragments that shimmer with a different kind of energy. Stories that seem too mythic, too unsettling, or too speculative to fit comfortably within a strictly theological framework. Among these is the claim that when the giants, the offspring of the Watchers, were destroyed, their spirits did not vanish. According to Jubilees, a portion of these spirits remained on the earth, bound to wander as malevolent entities influencing human behavior. The text names their leader Mastema, a figure whose presence rivaled the antagonist of the Adam and Eve story, yet operated on a scale that suggested something like a cosmic prosecutor, a being permitted by divine decree to test, challenge, and corrupt humanity within certain boundaries. The introduction of this character, and the justification for his continued existence, reveals an ancient attempt to explain the persistent presence of suffering, temptation, and evil in a world supposedly governed by a benevolent creator. This same logic threads through the stories of the patriarchs as they appear in another set of writings known as the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. These texts offer the final words of Jacob's 12 sons, each one peeling back the narrative presented in Genesis to reveal the inner turmoil and psychological landscape of figures previously depicted in clean, almost simplified strokes. Instead of mythic silhouettes, they become painfully human. Reuben, Israel's firstborn, confesses a sickness of desire that overtook him for months, a destructive hunger he compares to a fever burning through his body. Simeon reveals the corrosive jealousy that nearly drove him to kill his own brother. Levi recounts visions of otherworldly realms and celestial beings who ordained him to a priestly destiny, blurring the boundary between prophetic vision and cosmic appointment. Judah confronts his entanglement with wealth, lust, and manipulation. Joseph offers a portrait of forgiveness born not of naive purity but of suffering, endurance, and a profound understanding of human weakness. Together, these confessions form a mosaic of personalities shaped by the same forces that shape people in every era: desire, ambition, envy, anxiety, and hope. Yet the forbidden texts embed these emotions within a wider cosmic drama, suggesting that individual human choices ripple outward into the spiritual realm, affecting the balance of forces that govern the world. It is a worldview where every action carries metaphysical weight, and where the stories of families intertwine with hidden celestial currents. What appears at first to be a simple recounting of moral lessons gradually becomes a portrait of humanity, caught in a vast, invisible network of forces extending far beyond their comprehension. The need to understand these forces, the tension between divine sovereignty and human suffering, reaches its most haunting expression in the apocalyptic writings attributed to Ezra. These texts, especially the book known as To Esdras, emerge from a time of profound national trauma. The destruction of the temple, the scattering of the people, and the ruthless might of the empire that conquered them created a crisis of faith that reverberated across generations. In these writings, Ezra is not a distant scribe, but a man crushed beneath the weight of existential despair. He demands answers from the heavens, challenging the logic of a world where the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. He asks questions people still ask today. Why is justice uneven? Why does evil flourish? Why does God seem silent in the very moments when divine intervention feels most necessary? The answers he receives do not soothe him. The angelic figure Uriel tells him repeatedly that the human mind cannot grasp the architecture of divine reasoning. If he cannot measure the wind or recall a single day once it passes, how could he hope to understand the hidden blueprint that governs history? These responses are poetic, philosophical, and unnerving. They push Ezra into a deeper confrontation with the limits of human comprehension. Yet amid these layers of abstraction, the text delivers visions that feel intensely vivid. A monstrous eagle whose wings and heads represent the rulers of a vast empire. A lion emerging from the forest to judge it. A symbol of a messianic figure destined to challenge the world order. These images blend political critique with cosmic prophecy, presenting history not as a random sequence of events, but as a battlefield where spiritual forces contend behind the scenes. One of the most striking ideas in these writings is the claim that the world is divided into two ages: this present age, filled with suffering and dominated by the many, and an age to come, reserved for the few who can pass through the narrow path of righteousness. The metaphor used is unforgettable: a thin path suspended between fire on one side and deep water on the other. Only one person can walk it at a time. The implication is stark. Salvation is not collective. It is personal, demanding, and perilously difficult. This worldview, while severe, resonated with communities who felt abandoned by history, crushed by empire, and desperate for assurance that their suffering had meaning. Yet amid this darkness and despair, the forbidden writings offer moments of breathtaking hope. In one vision, Ezra sees a vast multitude dressed in white, gathered upon a mountain. Among them stands a towering figure who places crowns upon their heads. When Ezra asks who these people are, the answer reverberates through the centuries. These are those who remained faithful, who endured suffering, who confessed the name of the Most High, and the one who crowns them is called the Son of God. This title, appearing in a Jewish apocalyptic text written just decades before the rise of Christianity, would become a cornerstone of later theological developments. But here, in its earliest recorded form, it reflects a yearning for a Redeemer, a figure capable of bridging the gap between human suffering and divine justice, between the shattered world of the present and the perfected world of the future. Parallel to these grand cosmic narratives runs a quieter, more personal story preserved in the ancient Near Eastern tale known as the story of Ahikar. While rooted in the royal courts of Assyria, its themes resonate across cultures: wisdom as the highest form of power, betrayal as the deepest form of injury, and justice as a force that can be delayed but not denied. Ahikar is portrayed as a man of immense insight whose proverbs and teachings shaped the moral imagination of generations. But the story does not portray wisdom as a shield against suffering. Instead, it reveals how those closest to us can become instruments of our downfall. When Ahikar's adopted nephew betrays him, forging letters to accuse him of treason, the wise man falls not because of an external enemy, but because of misplaced trust. And yet the story insists on a moral arc. The innocent may be buried, figuratively or literally, but the truth will eventually break through the soil that attempts to cover it. What makes this tale unique among the forbidden writings is its focus on practical wisdom, advice about loyalty, humility, generosity, and self-control, delivered through vivid metaphors that remain striking even today. A proverb warns that the man who raises a serpent in his house should not be surprised when it bites him. Another cautions that the one who plants injustice will reap regret. These lessons, while grounded in the realities of royal politics, echo the struggles of ordinary people trying to navigate a world filled with shifting alliances, moral ambiguity, and unpredictable outcomes. Meanwhile, other forbidden texts examine the intersection of culture, language, and divine revelation. There are moments in ancient literature where the boundaries between history, myth, and political survival blur so completely that it becomes impossible to separate them. The forbidden writings that explore the struggle of empires, the clash of cultures, and the rise of a messianic hope are not simply chronicles of events. They are reflections of a people standing at the crossroads of extinction and rebirth. Among these writings, few carry the same intensity as the texts that emerged during the final decades of Jewish independence before the Roman conquest, a period marked by corruption within the ruling priesthood, political infighting that tore families apart, and foreign armies waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was a time when prophecy and politics collided, when poets disguised themselves as visionaries to critique the powerful, and when entire communities clung to the belief that a righteous leader would soon rise and restore justice to the land. The writings known as the Psalms of Solomon stand at the center of this turmoil. Though attributed to the legendary king whose wisdom became a template for divine insight, the texts themselves were forged by anonymous authors who lived through the collapse of the Hasmonean dynasty, a royal line that began with heroic resistance but ended in decadence and fratricidal war. These writers crafted their poems not as songs of worship, but as coded warnings and fierce denunciations of leaders who had betrayed their people. They describe rulers who defiled the sanctuary, who courted foreign cultures, and who indulged in pleasures that eroded the moral foundation of their nation. And while these texts condemned corruption, they also constructed a vision, a portrait of a coming king who would restore what had been lost, a figure called the Son of David. This title was not new. It reached back centuries to the promise of a ruler whose lineage would ensure stability and righteousness. But in the Psalms of Solomon, the Son of David becomes more than a king. He becomes a symbol of justice in a world dominated by foreign power. The Romans, led by a general whose reputation for ambition and cruelty spread across continents, marched into Jerusalem under the pretense of settling a dispute between two brothers vying for control of the high priesthood. What followed was an invasion masked as diplomacy. The Roman general breached the walls of the holy city, trampled through the sacred courts, and entered a place where only the high priest was allowed to stand. To the authors of the Psalms, this act was a cosmic violation, a sign that the leaders of their own people had failed so catastrophically that divine judgment was unavoidable. Yet even as they described foreign armies as instruments of punishment, these texts insisted that the rise of oppressive powers was temporary. The Son of David, when he appeared, would not be a mere political reformer. He would be a warrior shaped by divine righteousness, a judge capable of dismantling corrupt systems and purifying the land. This visionary king would gather the scattered tribes, confront the enemies of Israel, and rule not through wealth or military extravagance, but through an unwavering alignment with the will of the Most High. In a world where empires rose and fell with brutal efficiency, this vision offered hope that justice would not remain an unfulfilled dream. But the path to this messianic hope was paved with blood. The writings that detail the Maccabean revolt capture a different kind of struggle, one born not from poetic lament, but from the visceral desperation of a people pushed to their breaking point. The era begins with a ruler who sought to erase cultural identity by force. He demanded that the laws of the Jewish people be replaced with the customs of Greece, a civilization whose intellectual achievements dazzled the ancient world, but whose religious practices clashed violently with the monotheism that defined Jewish life. When the ruler stormed the temple, erected an image of Zeus, and sacrificed an unclean animal on the altar, the shock reverberated across villages and cities. In a small mountain town, an elderly priest refused to comply. His defiance, fueled by a zeal that burned through the generations of his family, sparked a revolution. The forbidden writings describe how his sons joined him in the wilderness and how their determination transformed them from fugitives into soldiers. Judah, one of the sons, became a commander known not just for bravery, but for strategy. He used the terrain to his advantage, launching ambushes, night raids, and guerrilla attacks that confounded the larger enemy forces. This was a war not for territory, but for identity, a struggle to restore a way of life on the verge of extinction. When the rebels retook the temple and rekindled the sacred fire, they celebrated for 8 days, a moment of triumph that would echo across centuries as a festival of dedication. But victory came with a heavy price. The second book that chronicles these events shifts the focus away from military success and toward martyrdom, offering stories so brutal and emotionally charged that they reshape the reader's understanding of devotion. One story recounts 7 brothers tortured one by one in front of their mother, each refusing to betray the laws of their ancestors. Their bodies were mutilated, their limbs severed, their lives extinguished in agony. Yet through every torment, their mother urged them to remain steadfast, believing that the Creator would restore them in the world to come. This belief in resurrection emerges more clearly in these forbidden writings than anywhere else in ancient Jewish literature. For the authors of the second Maccabees, martyrdom was not a tragic end, but a doorway to vindication. They argued that God would raise the righteous to eternal life, and that prayers for the dead could assist those who had fallen short. This represented a profound evolution in religious understanding. It introduced concepts that would later shape entire theological systems, influencing debates about the afterlife for centuries. The forbidden texts move from these dramatic battles and visions of martyrdom into a realm even more unsettling: the world of apocalyptic revelation. The writings attributed to Ezra stand as a monument to spiritual crisis and intellectual defiance. The protagonist is not a rebel leader or a prophetic king, but a man wrestling with overwhelming grief. He surveys his world, a nation broken, a temple destroyed, a people scattered, and demands answers from the heavens. Unlike the confident leaders of earlier stories, Ezra is vulnerable. He challenges divine justice directly, refusing to accept that suffering is meaningless. In response, the angelic voices that address him do not offer comfort. They speak in riddles and parables, pushing Ezra to confront the limits of his understanding. They describe the world as a narrow bridge suspended between elemental dangers, a place where salvation requires courage and clarity. They reveal visions in which monstrous empires take the shape of winged beasts and where a mysterious lion emerges to bring judgment upon them. These images were designed not only to interpret political events, but to provide reassurance to those living under oppression. Even the mightiest empire would eventually crumble under the weight of divine judgment. At the heart of these visions lies a profound tension between human free will and divine sovereignty. The writings suggest that while humanity struggles through a world filled with danger and injustice, the Creator operates on a scale far beyond human comprehension. The judgments rendered by heaven take into account dimensions of reality invisible to mortals. As Ezra grapples with these revelations, he sees a vision of a peaceful multitude crowned by a radiant figure. When he asks who they are, the answer reveals an early conception of a heavenly Redeemer, a Son of God who rewards those who endured suffering with unwavering faith. This moment echoes across the centuries, connecting Jewish apocalyptic thought with the theological foundations that would later define entire religious movements. Parallel to these grand themes is an exploration of human nature through stories like that of Ahikar, whose wisdom shaped nations, but whose downfall came at the hands of a trusted relative. In this ancient narrative, betrayal is not framed as a mere personal tragedy, but as a moral test woven into the fabric of existence. Ahikar's nephew, driven by ambition and envy, manipulates the king into ordering his execution. Yet the executioner, remembering a kindness Ahikar once showed him, spares his life and hides him away. What follows is a tale of poetic justice, where Ahikar's wisdom ultimately triumphs and the betrayer meets a humiliating end. The story serves as a bridge between cultures, influencing proverbs and moral teachings across continents. These forbidden writings, taken together, reveal something remarkable. The ancient world was not a place of simple narratives or passive acceptance. It was a crucible of ideas where poets, warriors, scribes, and visionaries grappled with the fundamental questions of existence. They confronted tyranny, suffering, betrayal, and cosmic mystery with a determination to understand their place in the universe. As empires rose and fell, these voices preserved fragments of truth, hope, and warning. They insisted that behind the visible world lay a deeper reality shaped by forces that defy easy explanation. Even now, these texts invite readers into a realm where history blends with myth, where spiritual insight emerges from the ashes of destruction, and where the human quest for meaning transcends time. The stories do not present themselves as polished artifacts, but as living testimonies to the resilience and imagination of ancient communities. They echo with the cries of martyrs, the chants of rebels, the laments of exiles, and the dreams of prophets. And through their words, one senses a persistent belief that no matter how dark the present moment, a transformation, a renewal, awaits just beyond the horizon. This conviction that hidden forces shape the destiny of nations and that revelation comes through struggle is woven into every line of the forbidden writings. They are not merely relics of a distant era. They are reminders that the search for truth often leads into shadowed places where certainty dissolves and mystery expands. In those places, stories become more than stories. They become maps, guiding those who seek understanding through the ruins of the past toward a future still being written. In the quiet undercurrent of ancient narratives, there exists a strange convergence where language, power, and revelation intertwine, forming a tapestry of influence that shaped civilizations long before modern memory took form. Among these convergences lies a story that appears deceptively simple, a tale about translation, diplomacy, and scholarly labor. Yet beneath its polished surface, it reveals a subtle war for authority, a contest over who has the right to define sacred truth. This tale, known through the writings attributed to Aristeas, recounts the origins of a work that would later shape theology, culture, and empire. The translation of Hebrew scripture into Greek. The text that would come to be called the Septuagint. The narrative unfolds within the bustling intellectual world of Alexandria, a city illuminated by its towering library and its magnetic pull on scholars from across the known world. The king portrayed in this story is not a distant ruler, but a curious patron of knowledge, gathering scrolls from every culture to create a treasury of human thought. Yet even in a library of hundreds of thousands of volumes, something is conspicuously missing: the laws of the Jewish people. This omission becomes the catalyst for a cultural exchange that would ripple across centuries. The king, guided by admiration for the unique wisdom of the Hebrew laws, sends envoys to Jerusalem with rich gifts and a request steeped in respect. He seeks not merely to acquire the texts, but to understand them, to integrate them into the intellectual legacy of the greatest city on earth. What follows is a meticulously crafted display of diplomacy. The high priest, surrounded by sacred tradition and ancient ritual, receives the envoys with ceremony, offering access not only to the texts, but also to 72 scholars, elders chosen for their mastery of both Hebrew and Greek. These men carry with them not just linguistic expertise, but the weight of communal memory. Their journey to Alexandria, adorned with symbolic gifts intended for the temple, becomes a procession of cultural dignity. And when they arrive, the king does not treat them as subordinates or servants, but as honored guests. He feasts with them, questions them, tests their wisdom, and each answer, polished, philosophical, sometimes startling, serves as a subtle argument for the ethical richness of their tradition. The heart of the story takes place on the island of Pharos, in a quiet space deliberately isolated from the noise of the city. It is here, according to the narrative, that the work of translation begins. In some versions, the scholars collaborate openly, discussing every phrase and nuance. In later retellings, each scholar is placed in a separate chamber, prevented from speaking to the others, while they translate the entire text independently. The miracle, these later accounts insist, is that when the 72 versions are compared, they match perfectly, word for word. This is not presented as coincidence, but as divine orchestration, as if an unseen hand guided each pen. Whether literal or symbolic, the claim was powerful. The translation was not merely a human project, but a revelation endorsed by heaven. This legend served multiple purposes. For the Jewish community in Alexandria, it affirmed that their scriptures remained authoritative, even outside their original language. For the Greek-speaking world, it framed Hebrew wisdom as a treasure worthy of royal attention, elevating its status among other philosophical works. And for later religious movements, especially those that would rely heavily on the Septuagint, it provided a foundation for interpreting ancient prophecy in ways that differed subtly but significantly from the Hebrew original. Words chosen by those long-ago translators would one day influence the shaping of entire belief systems, guiding interpretations of messianic expectation, cosmic order, and divine intervention. Yet the legend of the translation points to something deeper: the recognition that language is not passive. It carries the power to reshape meaning, to bridge cultures, and to redirect the spiritual imagination of entire societies. Even in the ancient world, people understood that the act of translation was an act of interpretation, and interpretation was an act of authority. Whoever held the pen held the power to shape how future generations would understand their past, their purpose, and their place in creation. Inside this quiet story of scrolls and scholars lies a subtle political tension. The struggle to preserve identity in a world where cultural boundaries were increasingly porous. Jewish communities scattered across empires needed texts that could travel with them, shaping their minds in foreign lands. The Greek translation offered continuity, but it also introduced questions about fidelity, adaptation, and the unavoidable influence of the wider world. These tensions are echoed in another set of ancient writings that grapple with the intersection of power and divine favor. Long after the reign of the biblical king who built the most famous temple in Jerusalem, a collection of poems emerged bearing his name. Yet these poems were not songs of celebration, but laments, warnings, and predictions. They describe a nation under siege from internal corruption and external threat. The authors condemn leaders who sought wealth instead of justice, who aligned themselves with foreign customs, and who compromised the sacred trust placed upon them. They describe a society where the poor are neglected, the temple is profaned, and the ruling class loses the mandate of heaven. The trauma of witnessing foreign armies breach the city's walls permeates these pages. The Roman general who marched into Jerusalem, confident, strategic, ruthless, becomes the embodiment of judgment. Yet the texts insist he is not the ultimate villain. He is merely a tool, an instrument of consequence wielded by a higher power. The true accusation is reserved for the leaders of the people themselves. According to these writings, corruption opened the gates long before the Roman legions arrived. When sacred positions are purchased, when justice becomes a commodity, when leaders exploit their people, collapse becomes inevitable. But amid the warnings emerges a new portrait of hope. The poems paint a figure known simply as the Son of David, a ruler unlike any who came before, a king not defined by military might, but by purity of heart and unwavering righteousness. This coming leader would rise as a beacon of justice in a world darkened by tyranny. He would gather the scattered, heal the wounded, and cleanse the land of oppression. Such imagery captures not just a longing for political restoration, but a deeper spiritual yearning. The desire for a leader who aligns human governance with the moral order embedded within creation. These longings become even more urgent in the writings that chronicle the revolt of the Maccabees. Here the ancient world erupts not in poetry, but in violence, as families rise against empires to preserve their sacred traditions. The narrative opens with a king determined to erase distinctions among the peoples he rules. He insists on cultural uniformity, believing that unity can be achieved only through assimilation. But when he enforces his decrees with brutality, burning texts, banning practices, and violating the sanctity of the temple, he triggers a resistance that spreads through the hills and valleys like wildfire. A single act of defiance sets the revolt in motion. An elderly priest refuses to bow to the tyranny of enforced worship. He strikes down both the apostate who complies and the officer who demands obedience. His sons flee with him into the wilderness, beginning a guerrilla campaign that will reshape history. Their leader, known for his fierce determination and tactical brilliance, emerges as a symbol of defiant hope. With small bands of fighters, he ambushes enemy forces, reclaims territory, and inspires ordinary farmers to take up arms in defense of their heritage. When the rebels finally reclaim the temple and restore its rituals, it becomes a victory of profound significance. They relight the sacred flame, rebuild the desecrated altar, and rededicate the holiest site in their tradition. The festival commemorating this event becomes a yearly reminder that resistance, faith, and perseverance can overcome even the most formidable oppression. But the writings of this era do not shy away from the darker realities of war. They recount the brutal tortures inflicted upon those who refuse to abandon their beliefs. They describe mothers who watch their sons suffer unimaginable pain, offering words of encouragement even as they witness the destruction of their families. These stories introduce ideas that would echo across religious history. The belief that the righteous dead will rise again, that divine justice extends beyond the physical world, and that sacrifice has eternal significance. The spiritual developments of this period extend into the apocalyptic texts attributed to Ezra, where the collapse of earthly structures leads to visions of cosmic renewal. In these writings, the prophet challenges the heavens with questions that pierce to the heart of human suffering. Why do the wicked flourish? Why is the world so filled with injustice? Why does God remain silent in the face of suffering? These questions resonate through time, echoing the existential struggles of countless generations. The answers delivered to him, spoken by angelic figures, remind him of the vastness of divine wisdom. They employ metaphors drawn from nature, time, and the limits of human perception. They suggest that just as a person cannot summon a day once it has passed, neither can he comprehend the hidden structures of divine purpose. These mysterious responses challenge readers to confront the limitations of their understanding while affirming that justice, though delayed, is certain. Yet the visions given to Ezra are not merely philosophical. They depict monstrous symbols representing empires, wars, and the eventual downfall of tyrannical powers. They reveal a figure who will judge the wicked and vindicate the righteous. The imagery is vivid, unsettling, and profoundly hopeful, a reminder that even in the darkest times, divine intervention remains possible. Parallel to these sweeping visions stands a quieter text, a moral tale that offers wisdom through the life of a court official. This figure, known for his integrity and insight, becomes the victim of betrayal at the hands of someone he trusted deeply. The narrative explores the fragility of human loyalty, the dangers of ambition, and the unexpected ways justice can manifest. Betrayal becomes not just a personal tragedy, but a reflection of broader social dynamics, where power shifts unpredictably and truth emerges through trial. Through his ordeal, this wise counselor demonstrates that resilience, humility, and wisdom ultimately triumph over deceit. His story underscores a recurring theme in the forbidden writings, that justice may be delayed but cannot be extinguished, and that hidden forces participate in the unfolding of human destiny. In this vast constellation of ancient narratives, poetic laments, revolutionary chronicles, apocalyptic visions, and moral tales, a single thread binds all the stories together: the belief that the human experience is shaped not only by visible events, but by unseen forces. Each text invites the reader to step beyond the boundaries of surface-level history and into a realm where myth, memory, and cosmic revelation merge. Across the shifting landscape of forbidden writings, there comes a moment when the narratives turn away from battles, prophets, kings, and empires, and instead narrow their gaze onto a question that has troubled the human imagination for millennia. What happened in the years of silence, the unrecorded chapters that exist in the spaces between the stories we think we know? The texts that explore these gaps do not offer comfortable explanations. Instead, they reveal glimpses of a world where the boundaries between divinity and humanity blur in unsettling ways. Among these writings, none carries a stranger or more haunting resonance than the accounts that attempt to describe the early life of a child whose existence would later reshape the course of history. These accounts, known in modern times as infancy Gospels, do not portray a serene childhood filled with gentle miracles and soft-spoken wisdom. They depict something far more raw, more volatile, and more enigmatic, a portrait of a young life marked by immense power struggling against the limits of human experience. At the center of these narratives stands a child who is at once deeply familiar and profoundly alien. The texts speak of him not as a distant figure of mythology, but as a living, breathing presence in a small village, growing among ordinary people who work the soil, build their homes from stone and timber, and gather water from communal wells. Yet this child does not behave like others. His actions disrupt the rhythms of everyday life, challenging the expectations of those around him and raising questions that no one can adequately answer. The early episodes presented in these writings are not gentle moral lessons. They are startling encounters with a force that appears to operate according to a logic beyond human comprehension. One of the first stories unfolds beside a stream after a rainfall. The child gathers murky water into small pools, shaping it with his hands until it becomes perfectly clear. He then forms small birds out of clay and breathes life into them with a simple command. It is a moment of pure creation, a gesture that reveals extraordinary capability. Yet it also reveals something unsettling. He performs this act on a day when such work is forbidden by the customs of his people. When confronted by an adult, he does not apologize or offer explanation. He simply claps his hands and sends the living birds into the sky. This scene, while seemingly innocent, hints at a deeper conflict, an early sign that the child's nature cannot be confined by the rules and expectations that govern ordinary life. But the most shocking moments do not arise from miracles of creation. They emerge from episodes of anger, instinct, and reaction, moments where the child's extraordinary power is wielded with startling immediacy. In one account, another boy disrupts the pools of clear water the child has formed. What might seem like simple mischief provokes a sudden and devastating judgment. The child speaks a word, and the boy collapses, lifeless. The reaction sends a wave of fear through the community. Parents cannot comprehend how to reconcile the innocence of youth with the magnitude of the power they have just witnessed. Whispered conversations begin to circulate. Questions about what kind of being this child could be and whether such power is a blessing, a curse, or something beyond either category. The accounts do not soften these events. They confront the reader with a difficult truth. Divine power, when placed in the hands of one who has not yet grown into the fullness of human empathy, can manifest in unpredictable and terrifying ways. The parents of the village, bewildered and frightened, confront the child's earthly guardian. They accuse him of raising a danger to their children, a force they cannot control. The tension between the extraordinary nature of the child and the ordinary world around him becomes almost unbearable. The guardians themselves feel the weight of responsibility pressing upon them like a physical burden. They cannot discipline him in the usual way, and they cannot protect the community from the consequences of his actions. They live in a constant state of uncertainty, unsure whether the next moment will bring healing or harm. Yet these same writings also depict a gradual transformation. As the child grows, he begins to direct his power toward restoration rather than punishment. When he is accused of injuring another child, he reaches out to the lifeless body and calls the boy back to life, demonstrating not only innocence, but a capacity for mercy. In another account, he resurrects the very boy he had struck down in a moment of anger. These episodes suggest a developing awareness, a slow, painful learning process in which overwhelming power becomes tempered by empathy, intention, and understanding. Healing becomes as natural to him as creation, and creation becomes a gateway to compassion rather than a tool of reaction. These texts also describe encounters with teachers who attempt to impart knowledge to the child. their failures become lessons in themselves. One teacher, confident in his ability to educate, begins with the first letter of the alphabet. He expects a young pupil, malleable and eager to learn. Instead, he meets a mind that challenges the very foundations of his method. The child demands to know the mystical symbolism behind the letter, the deeper meaning that transcends phonetic value. When the teacher cannot provide an answer, the child offers his own explanation, an intricate discourse that reveals knowledge far beyond the understanding of those around him. The teacher, overwhelmed, concedes that this pupil is not of ordinary origin. What this scene suggests is not arrogance, but tension, a being who cannot be contained within the structures designed for human learning. The stories culminate in a moment where the child, now older, appears in a setting filled with scholars and theologians. Here, the atmosphere shifts. Instead of fear or confusion, the observers respond with awe. His questions reveal profound insight, and his answers display mastery over subjects that seasoned scholars have spent their entire lives exploring. The tension that characterized his early years begins to dissolve. What was once unpredictable becomes focused. What was destructive becomes purposeful. The child emerges as a figure whose presence commands respect rather than anxiety, a being whose early volatility has settled into intentional clarity. Yet, even with this transformation, the infancy texts remain unsettling. They do not harmonize easily with more familiar narratives. They present a portrait of divinity that is not gentle, predictable, or easily contained. They reveal a process of becoming, a struggle between immense power and the constraints of human incarnation. This portrayal, though jarring, may reflect an ancient attempt to grapple with a mystery that defies comfortable explanation. The idea that transcendence, when bound to flesh, must navigate the full range of human experience, including confusion, frustration, and growth. These writings also serve another purpose. They draw attention to the silence surrounding the early life of a figure whose adulthood became the foundation of a vast religious tradition. People have always been troubled by gaps in stories, especially when those stories concern individuals of great significance. The infancy texts attempt to fill these voids with narratives that reflect both cultural imagination and theological speculation. They do not claim universal acceptance, nor do they present themselves as unquestioned historical accounts. Instead, they offer windows into the evolving beliefs of early communities seeking to understand how divinity interacts with humanity and how extraordinary lives begin. When we step back and view these writings in the larger context of forbidden texts, they reveal a common thread. Ancient people were not content with simple answers. They engaged in bold speculation, creative storytelling, and profound philosophical exploration. They probed mysteries that remain unsolved even today. Their writings, though fragmented, speak with a strangely modern tone. They echo questions about identity, destiny, morality, and the unseen forces that shape human existence. The infancy narratives also challenge assumptions about perfection. They depict a figure who begins not as an untouchable symbol of holiness, but as a living paradox, simultaneously human and more than human, capable of astonishing kindness and startling severity. This portrayal does not diminish his significance. Instead, it adds depth, revealing a journey rather than a static ideal. It suggests that the path toward spiritual maturity, even for those believed to be divine, involves tension, challenge, and transformation. Moreover, these texts reflect the anxieties and aspirations of the communities that produced them. They lived in a world where suffering was common, where oppression was real, and where the desire for hope burned intensely. The stories they crafted were not merely entertainment. They were attempts to make sense of their circumstances through the lens of myth, revelation, and sacred history. In describing a child whose power burst forth in unpredictable ways, they may have been expressing their own fear of forces they could not control, forces of empire, fate, or cosmic struggle. In describing his growth into wisdom and restraint, they may have been expressing a longing for justice, harmony, and redemption. These forbidden writings challenge us to approach ancient literature with humility. They reveal that the past was not simpler than the present. It was more complex, more tumultuous, and more filled with mystery than we often imagine. The ancient storytellers who crafted these accounts operated not with naive simplicity, but with imaginative depth, weaving together the threads of myth, theology, philosophy, and lived experience. Their voices reach across time, inviting modern readers to look beyond the boundaries of conventional narratives and into the shadowed spaces where alternative histories and forgotten interpretations reside. They also remind us that every tradition contains multitudes. Even within a single culture or faith, narratives compete, evolve, and transform. The infancy texts were suppressed or excluded in some traditions, preserved in others, and rediscovered by scholars centuries later. Their survival reveals a hidden layer of ancient belief, one that refuses to smooth over complexity or silence contradiction. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these writings is their willingness to embrace uncertainty. They do not attempt to control the divine through explanation. They do not strip away the strangeness of incarnation. They allow the narrative to breathe in the tension between the human and the transcendent. In doing so, they offer a glimpse into the ancient imagination, a place where the boundaries between worlds remain fluid, where the unseen shapes the seen, and where the earliest years of a life destined for greatness remain wrapped in enigma. In the end, these forbidden writings are not merely stories about a gifted child. They are reflections of humanity's ongoing struggle to understand power, morality, and destiny. They reveal that ancient communities, like modern ones, sought to trace the origins of the extraordinary, to explain the inexplicable, and to find meaning in the mysteries that have always hovered at the edge of human experience. Among the stranger paths carved through the landscape of ancient writings, there is one that does not begin with visions of the heavens or battles on sacred ground, nor with whispered prophecies or the rise and fall of empires. Instead, it begins in the confined, heavily fortified world of the Roman prison system, an environment where men who once commanded armies, shaped policies, or influenced regions found themselves reduced to numbers and shackles. It was in these bleak, echoing corridors that a different kind of ancient literature emerged, a literature forged under duress, sharpened by fear, and softened by longing. These writings, attributed to prisoners awaiting execution or exile, reveal a raw and intimate perspective on human resilience in the shadow of overwhelming tyranny. They explore questions not from the mountaintops of revelation, but from the depths of captivity, where identity, loyalty, and purpose are tested with every passing hour. One of the most haunting texts in this category is a set of letters and speeches attributed to a man known for his fiery conviction and willingness to challenge oppressive systems. These writings, preserved in fragments and echoes, describe the stark emotional landscape of a person who finds himself cut off from the world he sought to change. The prison walls are described not as mere stone barriers, but as symbols of empire's attempt to contain the spirit. Chains become metaphors for the weight of suffering, yet they also signify the unbroken resolve of one who believes that truth cannot be silenced by physical confinement. In these writings, the imprisoned figure addresses communities he once guided, urging them not to let despair consume them, not to abandon the cause simply because he faces the end of his own journey. One recurring theme in these letters is the contrast between external restriction and internal freedom. The prisoner speaks of a liberation that comes not from open roads, fields, or marketplaces, but from an unwavering sense of purpose. He writes of nights when the cold settles into his bones, when the shouts of guards echo through the stone corridors, and when the future feels no larger than the cell that contains him. Yet even in these moments, he insists that a light persists, a flame that cannot be extinguished by fear or resignation. This emphasis on inner strength reflects a broader ancient belief that true freedom is a condition of the soul, not the body. The walls may be impenetrable, but the mind, he argues, can transcend them. Another dimension of this prison literature emerges in the form of courtroom speeches and final testimonies, crafted not for the purpose of legal defense, but for the preservation of dignity. These texts often read like dramatic performances, blending rhetorical skill with cosmic conviction. In one such account, the defendant stands before a tribunal of imperial officials. His accusers list his alleged crimes: disturbing public order, challenging established authorities, undermining the religious practices sanctioned by the state. Instead of begging for mercy, he turns the accusation into a critique of the very structures judging him. He describes a world where truth has become a commodity, manipulated by those who fear its disruptive potential. He reminds the court that empire may command legions and impose tribute, but it cannot control the conscience of individuals who see beyond its facade. These speeches reveal a fascinating tension between vulnerability and defiance. The prisoner acknowledges his frailty, his aging body, the bruises from beatings, the uncertainty of each new day. But he also asserts that suffering refines conviction. His words suggest that captivity strips away distractions, exposing the core of belief. In the quiet isolation of a cell, he confronts his fears, doubts, and regrets. And though the texts do not shy away from the psychological toll of imprisonment, they also portray a surprising sense of clarity emerging from the darkness. This inner clarity often takes the form of reflections on mortality. Ancient prison writings do not romanticize death. They portray it as a looming figure whose presence becomes familiar over time. Yet they also frame it as a transition rather than an end. The prisoner writes of life as a journey, one that extends beyond the physical limits of the world he currently inhabits. He describes a realm where justice is no longer distorted by political influence, where suffering is not dismissed but understood, and where those who endured hardship stand vindicated Whether these reflections arise from mystical visions, philosophical contemplation, or sheer necessity remains ambiguous. What is clear is that they reveal a worldview capable of transforming despair into a stepping stone toward meaning. Parallel to these deeply personal writings are texts that explore the broader social dynamics of the ancient world, especially the tensions between different cultural groups. One particularly illuminating work recounts the complex relationships between various factions within the Jewish community during the Hellenistic and Roman eras. It speaks of Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and other groups whose interpretations of law, purity, and authority frequently clashed. Each faction believed itself the rightful guardian of tradition. Each accused the others of distorting the truth. The writings describe debates so fierce that they resemble battles fought not with swords, but with doctrines, rituals, and interpretations of sacred texts. These conflicts, while intellectual on the surface, carried profound political implications. In an era where foreign powers sought to control subject nations by exploiting internal divisions, ideological disputes became tools of survival or subjugation. The texts suggest that some factions aligned themselves with imperial authorities for the sake of stability, while others retreated into isolation, building communities in the wilderness where they could practice their beliefs without interference. The tensions between these groups created a simmering atmosphere that shaped the backdrop for many of the narratives preserved in forbidden writings. Among the most intriguing of these factional accounts are the stories of desert-dwelling communities who embraced an austere lifestyle far removed from the urban centers of their time. They rejected wealth, luxury, and the political entanglements that plagued mainstream society. They viewed themselves as custodians of a sacred covenant, preparing for a transformative event they believed was imminent. These communities produced texts filled with apocalyptic expectation, describing a coming battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. Their writings adopt a tone of urgency, portraying the world as a battlefield in which every action carries cosmic significance. One such text describes a final, decisive war, a confrontation between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. The imagery is stark, depicting legions of celestial beings descending to join human warriors in the struggle for cosmic balance. The detailed instructions for weaponry, formations, and ritual purity suggest that the text served not only as prophecy, but as preparation. It offered a vision of hope to those who felt marginalized by the powers of their age. The promise of divine intervention gave meaning to their sacrifices and reinforced their belief that they were participants in a story larger than themselves. In contrast to these militaristic visions, other writings from desert communities adopt a more contemplative tone. They focus on purity, discipline, and communal harmony. They describe a lifestyle governed by strict rules regarding diet, speech, and interpersonal behavior. The goal was not merely to avoid sin, but to achieve a state of spiritual readiness for the revelation they believed was soon to come. These texts illuminate the ancient struggle to balance engagement with the world and withdrawal from it, a tension still recognizable in modern debates about the role of faith in public life. Another set of ancient writings explores the nature of wisdom itself. These texts embrace a broader cultural perspective, incorporating ideas from Greek philosophy, Egyptian traditions, and Babylonian cosmology. They present wisdom not as mere knowledge, but as a living presence, a feminine figure who moves through creation, guiding those who seek understanding. In one poetic passage, wisdom is described as standing at the crossroads, calling out to those who wander in confusion. She invites them to follow her path, promising insight into mysteries both earthly and divine. These writings present a universe in which everything, stars, oceans, nations, and individuals, is connected through an intricate web of meaning. They speak of a cosmic order that predates humanity, a structure woven into the fabric of existence. Wisdom becomes the mediator between this cosmic order and the human mind. She reveals patterns that lie hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life, offering glimpses into the deeper logic of creation. Yet even as these texts celebrate wisdom, they acknowledge the challenges of pursuing it. They warn that folly, pride, and distraction can obscure the path. They portray the pursuit of understanding as a demanding journey, one that requires discipline, humility, and perseverance. The writings challenge readers to examine their own desires and motivations, suggesting that true wisdom cannot be attained without confronting the darker aspects of the self. In parallel, another ancient text of extraordinary depth explores the meaning of suffering and resilience. This narrative unfolds around a figure who loses everything: wealth, family, health, and struggles to make sense of his misfortune. His friends arrive not to comfort, but to accuse, insisting that he must have sinned to deserve such hardship. Yet the central character refuses to accept their simplistic explanations. He demands answers from the divine, challenging the notion that suffering is always tied to guilt. His boldness becomes a central theme: the courage to question, to confront, and to seek truth even when the world collapses around him. The divine response in this text is one of the most mysterious passages in ancient literature. Rather than explaining the reasons for suffering, the voice from the whirlwind describes the vastness of creation, the foundations of the earth, the boundaries of the sea, the constellations that mark the seasons, and the strange, awe-inspiring creatures that roam the wilderness. The message is not a justification, but an invitation to humility. The text suggests that human suffering cannot be understood in isolation from the grandeur and complexity of existence. It challenges readers to expand their perspective, to recognize that their place in the universe is both fragile and meaningful. These writings about suffering resonate deeply with the prison literature discussed earlier. Together, they paint a portrait of ancient humanity grappling with the universal questions that still define the human experience. Why do we suffer? What is the nature of justice? How do we maintain hope in the face of overwhelming adversity? The forbidden texts do not offer easy answers. They present a tapestry of perspectives, each illuminating a different facet of the human condition. As time marches through the ancient world, another set of writings emerges from the shadows, texts that explore the mystical traditions growing within diverse communities. These writings describe visionary experiences, symbolic rituals, and meditative practices designed to access hidden realms. They portray the universe as layered, with each layer revealing new insights into the divine nature. The practitioners of these traditions believed that through disciplined meditation, sacred recitation, or symbolic gestures, they could ascend through these layers, approaching a deeper understanding of cosmic truth. Some of these mystical writings employ elaborate symbolism. They describe heavenly palaces guarded by angelic beings, each palace representing a different aspect of divine reality. The journey through these realms is perilous, requiring purity, preparation, and the correct recitation of sacred names. Failure to meet the conditions could result in confusion, spiritual disintegration, or even death. Yet those who successfully navigate the mystical ascent experience a profound transformation, gaining insights that cannot be conveyed through ordinary language. The final passages of these mystical texts often shift from imagery to reflection. They emphasize that the ultimate goal of spiritual ascent is not power or revelation, but reconciliation. Reconciliation between the human and the divine, between the self and the cosmos. They suggest that the greatest mystery is not the structure of the heavens, but the alignment of the human heart with the hidden architecture of creation. Through all these diverse writings, letters from prison, debates among factions, apocalyptic visions, hymns to wisdom, meditations on suffering, and mystical journeys, one theme emerges with striking clarity. The ancient world was not silent. It was saturated with voices seeking understanding, courage, and transcendence. These voices did not merely endure oppression, exile, or uncertainty. They transformed their experiences into stories that illuminate the depths of human potential and the vastness of the unseen world that surrounds it. In the deep undercurrents of ancient stories, there are moments when the narrative turns abruptly, leaving behind kings, warriors, prophets, and mystics to focus on something far more unsettling. The unseen forces that ancient people believed moved quietly beneath the fabric of the world. These writings do not describe the heavens in sweeping visions, nor do they anchor themselves in the political catastrophes of empires. Instead, they explore the trembling boundary between the physical and the spiritual, a boundary that ancient storytellers believed was far thinner than modern minds can easily accept. It is here, in the shadowed margins of forbidden texts, that we encounter tales of spirits that linger after death, of realms that overlap with human existence, and of beings that traverse the thin veil between life and the unseen. Among the most perplexing of these writings is a collection of reflections and visions attributed to a man who claimed to have glimpsed the world that unfolds after one's final breath. His story does not begin with illness, age, or the slow decline that often precedes death. Instead, it begins suddenly, with his consciousness being torn from the physical realm and cast into a landscape he could scarcely describe. The transition, he insists, was not a dream, not an illusion formed by a fevered mind, but a profound displacement, an experience rooted in reality, but incompatible with the ordinary senses. He describes the moment of separation as a violent tearing, a wrenching sensation that left him suspended between two worlds. Yet once the initial terror faded, he found himself in a place both familiar and alien. The earth beneath him was solid, yet it shimmered with a faint, luminescent quality. The air felt heavy, as if saturated with meaning rather than moisture, and distant voices, soft and indistinct at first, echoed with a tone that carried neither joy nor sorrow, but a strange neutrality, an emotional stillness that felt utterly unlike human expression. It is in this realm that he encounters the first of several beings who serve as guides and interpreters of what he is witnessing. These beings do not resemble angels in the traditional sense. They do not possess wings, radiance, or clearly defined features. Instead, they appear as silhouettes of light, shifting in shape, difficult to perceive directly, as though the human mind can grasp only fragments of their form. They communicate without words, transmitting impressions, emotions, and concepts directly into his awareness. Through these interactions, the traveler begins to understand that he is observing the passage of souls, spirits emerging from the physical world and crossing into the unseen. The experiences of these souls differ wildly. Some move freely, as though guided by an internal compass. Others drift uncertainly, confused and unprepared. A few seem bound by invisible chains, weighed down by forces he cannot identify. The guides explain, in their own enigmatic way, that the state of the soul at the moment of death determines the path that unfolds. Yet the criteria for this determination are far more complex than moral simplicity. Intention, memory, desire, fear, and unresolved conflicts all intertwine to shape the soul's immediate transition. The traveler witnesses one soul in particular, a figure whose life had been consumed by rage and bitterness. Instead of moving forward, this soul circles endlessly, drawn back toward the world it left behind. Its form flickers with agitation, as though unable to release its grip on the grievances of life. He watches as the soul attempts to re-enter the physical world, pressing itself against the barrier between realms. It succeeds only partially, manifesting as a faint disturbance in the living world, a chill in the air, a fleeting whisper, a sensation of being watched. This is the ancient explanation for hauntings, for the restless dead who cannot move on. They are not malevolent by nature, the guides explain. They are trapped by the weight of what they carried in life. Another soul, in stark contrast, moves with serene certainty. It glides effortlessly toward a distant horizon, where the landscape shifts from muted gray to a warm golden glow. The traveler senses that this soul carries no burden of regret. Its memories are intact, but they do not bind it. Its desires persist, but they do not cling. The guides regard this soul with reverence, suggesting that it has achieved a rare state of balance, a harmony between the life it lived and the world it now enters. The traveler becomes aware of a curious phenomenon. Time behaves differently in this realm. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours, while entire scenes shift in the span of a breath. The guides reveal that time, as understood by mortals, is not a universal constant, but a constraint of the physical world. In the unseen, time flows according to the needs of the soul. Moments expand when reflection is required, contract when clarity emerges, and dissolve entirely when the soul moves beyond the structures of memory. As the traveler continues his journey, the realm itself begins to change. He moves through landscapes that seem to respond to his thoughts. A barren field blossoms into a lush meadow when he recalls a moment of joy from his childhood. A calm sea turns stormy when he remembers a period of fear. The guides explain that the soul shapes its environment, consciously or not. This realm is not a final destination, but a transitional space, a place where the inner self becomes visible, where hidden emotions take form, and where unresolved conflicts must be confronted before the soul can move forward. In one striking encounter, The traveler witnesses a group of souls gathered around a shimmering pool. The pool reflects not the world around them, but scenes from their past. Each soul gazes into the water, reliving moments that defined them. Some scenes are joyful, others are painful. The traveler understands that this is not punishment, but revelation. The pool reveals truth, unfiltered and unavoidable. It shows not only actions, but intentions, the silent motivations behind decisions, the fears that shaped choices, the desires that guided behavior. This process, the guides suggest, is essential. Without self-understanding, the soul cannot progress. The scenes shift again, and the traveler finds himself standing before an enormous structure that resembles a library, though its dimensions defy description. Its shelves are filled not with scrolls or tablets, but with luminous threads of light. Each thread vibrates with a distinct frequency, producing a faint hum that blends into a cosmic harmony. The guides explain that these threads represent the lives of individuals, each choice, each moment woven into a tapestry that records the essence of existence. The traveler senses an overwhelming depth of meaning emanating from the structure. He feels as though he is standing at the threshold of a vast archive of human experience, one that transcends time and physical reality. He becomes aware, too, of the presence of beings who inhabit this structure, keepers of knowledge who maintain the threads and ensure their integrity. These beings do not communicate directly with him, but he senses their attention. They perceive him as an anomaly, a living soul temporarily granted access to a realm reserved for those who have completed their journey. The traveler is eventually led to a boundary where the unseen realm thins, merging once more with the physical world. He feels the familiar pull of his body, the weight of gravity, the rhythm of his heartbeat returning. The guides convey a final impression, that he must carry what he has seen into his life, not as a prophecy, but as a reminder of the invisible forces that shape human existence. When he awakens, he finds himself lying on the ground, surrounded by those who believed he had died. Their shock at his revival mirrors his own confusion. He struggles to articulate what he has witnessed, knowing that words cannot capture the profound strangeness of the experience. Yet the memory remains, vivid and indelible, shaping the rest of his life. Stories like this one, preserved in fragments and echoes across forbidden texts, reveal an ancient fascination with the afterlife that goes far beyond simplistic notions of reward and punishment. These writings portray a universe alive with meaning, where consciousness persists beyond physical dissolution, where souls undergo transformation, and where the unseen world mirrors the inner landscape of the self. Another striking account describes a journey not through the realm of the dead, but through layers of the heavens. The narrator, a mystic whose name remains uncertain, claims to have been lifted from the earth by a being of radiant form. The ascent begins with a violent rush, as though the air itself collapses beneath him. The world below recedes rapidly, shrinking into a mosaic of color and shape. He feels his senses expanding, perceiving sounds beyond the range of hearing, light beyond the spectrum of sight. The first layer of heaven appears as a vast expanse filled with luminous beings engaged in constant movement. They weave patterns of energy that resemble cosmic currents, guiding the forces that sustain life on Earth. The mystic is told that these beings maintain the cycles of wind, rain, and growth. The harmony of nature, he learns, is not automatic, but the result of intentional orchestration. The beings regard him with curiosity, as though examining a rare visitor from a distant realm. In the second layer, he encounters a darker domain where souls linger in states of confusion. This is not a place of punishment, but of orientation, where individuals confront the consequences of their earthly actions. The mystic witnesses scenes of regret, sorrow, and recognition. He understands that these souls are not condemned, but undergoing a process of purification, preparing for the next stage of their journey. Higher layers of heaven reveal increasingly abstract realities. In one, he sees a realm of pure thought, where beings communicate through symbols that manifest as shapes of light. In another, he perceives a domain governed by harmonics, where sound becomes structure and emotion forms architecture. The mystic struggles to describe these realms, acknowledging that the limitations of human language make accurate depiction impossible. At the pinnacle of his ascent, he reaches a chamber of indescribable brilliance. Here, he encounters a presence that radiates an overwhelming sense of peace, purpose, and authority. The being communicates not through words, but through direct infusion of knowledge. The mystic receives insights into the nature of creation, the purpose of existence, and the interconnectedness of all life. These revelations alter him profoundly, reshaping his understanding of the world. When he returns to the physical realm, he finds himself struggling to reintegrate. The noise of daily life feels abrasive. Ordinary concerns seem trivial, yet he is compelled to share his experience, even though he knows that most will not believe him. His writings stand as a testament to the ancient belief that reality is layered, that unseen realms interlace with the visible world, and that human consciousness is capable of transcending physical limits. Another set of forbidden writings delves into the nature of spiritual beings who inhabit the unseen world. These texts categorize them not by appearance, but by function. Some serve as messengers, carrying impressions and guidance to those receptive enough to perceive them. Others act as protectors, steering individuals away from danger or influencing subtle decisions that alter the course of life. Yet others serve as watchers, observers who record the patterns of human behavior without intervening. The texts suggest that the unseen world is populated by a vast hierarchy of beings, each contributing to the balance of creation. The writings also describe malevolent entities, spirits born of suffering, resentment, or corruption. These beings do not possess physical form, but can manifest through disturbance, chaos, and confusion. They are drawn to emotional turmoil, feeding on states of anger, despair, or fear. Ancient people believed that rituals of purification, prayer, or meditation could protect individuals from these influences by stabilizing the inner landscape of the self. In yet another narrative, a sage recounts the story of a man who wanders into a desolate region believed to be inhabited by spirits. As night falls, he begins to sense an oppressive presence. Shadows move without wind, and whispers echo from unseen sources. The man, overwhelmed by fear, calls out for protection. Suddenly, a radiant figure appears, dispersing the darkness with a wave of light. The sage presents this event not as a legend, but as an example of the unseen world responding to the cries of those in distress. Through all these accounts, journeys into the realm of the dead, ascents through the heavens, interactions with spiritual beings, the forbidden writings construct a vision of reality far richer and more complex than the material world suggests. They portray existence as a continuum where physical and spiritual dimensions overlap, where consciousness endures, and where unseen forces influence the course of life. These narratives challenge modern assumptions about the nature of reality. They suggest that ancient people perceived themselves as part of a universe alive with meaning, intention, and mystery. They believed that life was not confined to the visible world, but extended into realms accessible through vision, death, or spiritual discipline. Whether these accounts are literal descriptions, symbolic expressions, or attempts to articulate experiences beyond ordinary perception, they capture a profound truth. Humanity has always sought to understand what lies beyond the horizon of life. They remind us that the ancient world was not silent, naive, or primitive. It was filled with explorers of consciousness, seekers of truth, and individuals willing to confront the unknown. Their writings, though obscured by time, continued to whisper across the centuries, urging us to consider that reality may be far stranger, deeper, and more interconnected than we can easily comprehend. There are passages in the forbidden writings where the narrative shifts once again, away from the hidden realms of spirits and the trembling boundary between life and death, and instead turns toward a question whose shadow stretches across all of human history. Who truly rules the world? The visible powers seated on thrones, or the unseen forces guiding events from behind the curtain? These ancient texts offer no simple answers. Instead, they present a vision of reality where empires rise not merely through military strength or political cunning, but through alignment with deeper energies that move through time like tides. They portray kings as instruments, generals as temporary figures, and nations as actors in dramas whose scripts were written long before they entered the stage. Among the most enigmatic writings in this category is a chronicle attributed to an unknown visionary living in a time of imperial oppression. His account begins with an ordinary night, quiet and uneventful, until a shudder passes through his body and the world around him dissolves. He finds himself in a vast chamber filled with smoke-like light, a place where the boundaries between shape and energy blur into indistinguishable forms. At the center of the chamber stands a being robed in shimmering darkness, not darkness as absence of light, but darkness alive with movement, like the surface of deep water stirred by unseen currents. This figure identifies itself not by name, but by role, claiming to be the keeper of kingdoms, the one who sets rulers upon their thrones and removes them according to a pattern known only to the unseen. The visionary is shown scenes unfolding like layers of time compressed into a single moment. He sees empires rise with the roaring force of storms, leaders marching with confidence, believing themselves to be the architects of their own destinies. But the Keeper of Kingdoms reveals the truth behind these rise and fall cycles. Each empire grows according to a specific alignment of spiritual forces, and each collapses when that alignment fractures. What mortals perceive as political miscalculation or military defeat is, in reality, the unraveling of an underlying pattern. This hidden architecture of power is described not as fate in the deterministic sense, but as a living system in which human actions interact with unseen energies that amplify or diminish their effects. In one vision, the keeper shows the rise of a great empire, symbolized by a beast with iron teeth and bronze claws. The visionary watches as the beast devours territories, absorbing smaller creatures into its body. Yet, as it grows, it becomes unstable, its limbs stretching too thin to support its expanding mass. Eventually, the beast collapses under its own weight, shattered by internal corruption rather than external force. The message is clear. No empire falls solely because of foreign enemies. All collapse begins within, when the moral and spiritual foundations that sustain a nation erode beyond repair. Another vision reveals a different kind of empire, represented not as a beast, but as a shining tower built upon unstable soil. Each stone of the tower glows with ambition, intelligence, and cultural achievement. But beneath its surface, invisible cracks begin to form. The keeper explains that this empire is undone not by violence, but by fragmentation, small divisions, rivalries, and competing desires that eventually cause the structure to crumble from the inside. The visionary understands this to be a warning. Unity built on pride is destined to fracture, but unity grounded in purpose can endure even the severest storms. These revelations are accompanied by scenes in which spiritual beings, neither fully benevolent nor malevolent, interact with human rulers. Some whisper into the minds of kings, planting ideas that grow into catastrophic decisions. Others restrain or redirect impulses, preventing disasters that would have reshaped the world. The texts describe these beings not as puppeteers controlling human will, but as influences that amplify latent tendencies. A king inclined toward cruelty becomes more so when aligned with destructive forces. A ruler inclined toward justice becomes stronger when supported by benevolent energies. The ultimate responsibility remains human, yet the unseen world plays a silent, decisive role in shaping outcomes. The visionary is then shown scenes of ordinary people whose lives appear insignificant by worldly standards: farmers, artisans, wanderers, servants. Yet in the unseen realm, threads of light connect these individuals to the unfolding of global events. A single act of compassion alters the spiritual climate of an entire region. A moment of injustice reverberates outward, affecting the balance of unseen forces. These writings suggest that the world does not revolve solely around kings and generals. Instead, it is sustained by the cumulative weight of countless small actions, each contributing to the evolving energy of history. The visionary's final revelation is the most unsettling. He is shown a map of the world, not drawn on parchment or carved into stone, but woven from strands of living light. This map shifts constantly, responding to human choices and unseen movements. The Keeper of Kingdoms explains that history is not a straight line, but a web of possibilities. Each decision, each empire, each individual contributes to the shape of the future. Yet certain moments, called hinges of time, carry disproportionate influence. At these hinges, small decisions can redirect the course of entire civilizations. The visionary understands that these hinges are recognized not by their outward appearance, but by the resonance they produce in the unseen realm. The forbidden texts then shift to another narrative, one concerning the nature of cosmic conflict, a struggle that unfolds not in kingdoms and cities, but in the invisible spaces between them. This conflict is described not as war in the conventional sense, but as a battle for alignment, influence, and balance. Ancient writers portray the world as suspended between opposing forces, one that seeks harmony, order, and restoration, and another that feeds on chaos, fragmentation, and despair. These forces are not personified as absolute good or evil. Instead, they represent tendencies, movements that shape the moral and spiritual climate of the world. In one account, a watcher stationed at the border of the unseen realm reports that currents of chaotic energy have begun to surge through human society. These currents manifest in rising violence, moral confusion, and the collapse of trust. The watcher describes these conditions not as random, but as symptoms of deeper imbalances. When communities lose their sense of purpose, when leaders succumb to selfish ambition, when individuals retreat into fear and isolation, the chaotic forces gain strength. The watcher warns that this imbalance can draw destructive manifestations into the physical world. Wars, plagues, natural disasters, not as punishments, but as consequences of spiritual disarray. Yet the texts insist that restoration is always possible. In another passage, the watcher recounts a moment when humans engaged in acts of compassion, generosity, and unity. These actions generate waves of harmonious energy that stabilize the unseen realm, pushing back the chaotic currents. The watcher marvels at the power of simple virtues, noting that they create ripples far greater than their earthly expressions suggest. This perspective elevates ordinary actions into cosmic significance. The kindness of a stranger, the forgiveness of an enemy, the courage to speak truth, all become contributions to the balance of creation. The writings also describe periods when the veil between worlds becomes unusually thin. During such times, dreams take on heightened clarity. Signs appear in the sky, unusual constellations, strange lights, atmospheric anomalies. Animals behave differently, sensing disruptions in the spiritual field. People experience unexplainable moments of intuition or déjà vu. These phenomena are presented not as superstition, but as indicators that the unseen realm is pressing more closely against the material world. The ancient writers believed that such periods offered opportunities for revelation, transformation, and renewed alignment. One particularly mysterious text recounts the story of a group of individuals scattered across different lands who each experience the same dream. A vision of a great tree whose branches extend across the world, whose roots dig deep into the unseen realm, and whose leaves glow with shifting patterns of light. In the dream, the tree begins to wither. The branches darken, the leaves fall, and the trunk cracks. A voice speaks from within the tree, warning that humanity has forgotten its connection to the deeper rhythms of creation. The individuals who share this dream feel compelled to seek one another out, guided by intuition, signs, and coincidences that defy ordinary explanation. When they finally gather, they realize that each carries a fragment of a message. Only by combining their insights can they understand the full warning. The world is approaching a hinge of time, a moment when the balance between harmony and chaos will be tested. Their story unfolds across deserts, mountains, and cities, blending mundane travel with mystical experiences. Along the way, they encounter individuals who either help or hinder them, some knowingly, others unconsciously influenced by unseen forces. The group discovers that their shared dream is not unique. Others across the world have received similar visions, though often distorted by cultural lenses. Some interpret the withering tree as a sign of political collapse, others as environmental deterioration, and still others as spiritual decay. The forbidden texts use this narrative to illustrate a profound idea: that human interpretations of divine messages are always partial, shaped by experience, fear, and expectation. The group eventually reaches a hidden sanctuary, an ancient site believed to stand at a point where the boundaries between worlds intersect. Inside, they encounter a being who identifies itself as a guardian of cycles, a custodian of cosmic rhythm. This being explains that humanity stands at a crossroads, not because of predetermined fate, but because of accumulated choices. The withering tree symbolizes the weakening connection between humanity and the deeper currents of creation. The guardian does not offer a prophecy of doom, but a call to awareness. It insists that the future remains unwritten, shaped by the collective alignment of human will. The forbidden texts then move toward teachings on the nature of revelation. They argue that divine messages are not confined to written words or dramatic visions. Instead, revelation is an ongoing process woven into the fabric of daily life. A sunset that stirs wonder, a moment of unexpected insight, a coincidence that feels meaningful. These are described as subtle touches from the unseen world, invitations to perceive deeper truths. Ancient people, the texts claim, were more attuned to these signals because they lived closer to the rhythms of nature and relied less on structured systems of thought. Modern minds, burdened by noise, distraction, and cynicism, struggle to perceive these subtle impressions. Another text describes revelation as a dialogue rather than a decree. Humans send questions, desires, and fears into the unseen realm, and the realm responds in forms that align with their capacity to understand. This reciprocal relationship means that revelation evolves alongside human consciousness. As understanding grows, messages become more complex. As understanding diminishes, messages become simpler, sometimes reduced to warnings or symbols that bypass rational interpretation. In the final passages of these writings, the focus shifts towards the concept of hidden potential, dormant abilities within humanity that can emerge in moments of crisis or clarity. These abilities are not described as supernatural powers, but as heightened forms of perception, intuition, and insight. The texts suggest that every individual carries a unique resonance, a specific pattern of energy that, when aligned with the deeper currents of creation, allows them to perceive truths normally hidden. These moments of heightened awareness can manifest as sudden clarity during danger, inexplicable certainty during confusion, or creative breakthroughs that seem to arrive from beyond the conscious mind. The forbidden texts conclude with a haunting assertion that humanity is not merely a passenger in the unfolding story of the world, but a participant whose choices shape the destiny of both the seen and unseen realms. What happens next does not depend solely on forces beyond control, but on the alignment of human hearts with the deeper rhythms of creation. This message, echoing across centuries, reminds readers that the world is far more mysterious than it appears, and that even in the darkest times, hidden pathways of restoration remain open to those willing to seek them. In the deeper strata of forbidden writings, there exists a body of ancient reflections that does not concern the heavens, the dead, the guardians of cosmic cycles, or the hidden wars among unseen forces. Instead, These writings turn their gaze toward the structure of time itself, how ancient people perceived beginnings, endings, and the mysterious spaces that stretch between them. These texts propose that time is not a uniform river, but a layered, shifting landscape, one that bends, folds, and occasionally fractures. They describe time not as a sequence of isolated moments, but as a living organism, responsive to human actions, celestial rhythms, and the unseen forces that pulse through creation. In this vision, time is both a teacher and a judge, revealing truths gradually while preserving mysteries beyond the reach of any single generation. One such writing begins with a meditation on the origins of time. It claims that before the first dawn, before the shaping of land and sea, there existed a silent expanse where potential hovered without form. This was not nothingness, but a state of waiting, as though reality itself paused to inhale before exhaling creation. Into this quiet emerged the first rhythm, a pulse of energy described as neither light nor sound, but something deeper, a vibration that laid the foundation for all that would follow. The text suggests that this primordial rhythm continues to echo through existence, forming the baseline against which the melodies of history are played. To the ancient mind, this meant that every event, no matter how small, resonated against this original pulse, creating harmonics that shaped the trajectory of time. From this foundation, the writings explore the concept of cycles. They argue that history is built upon recurring patterns, periods of growth, decline, renewal, and transformation. These cycles are depicted not as rigid structures, but as flexible spirals, allowing variation and evolution while preserving their underlying rhythm. According to the texts, civilizations rise when they align with the harmonious phase of a cycle, when their values resonate with the deeper currents of creation. Conversely, civilizations fall when they drift into dissonance, when their structures, beliefs, and aspirations lose alignment with the hidden architecture of time. The ancient writers describe these phases with poetic intensity, portraying history as a vast symphony in which nations either contribute to the cosmic harmony or generate discord that eventually collapses under its own weight. One writing offers a striking metaphor for this process. It depicts history as a great tree whose roots reach into the unseen realm and whose branches stretch across the ages. Each root represents a foundational moment: birth, exile, covenant, revelation, events that anchor human experience to deeper truths. The branches represent generations, unfolding across centuries. Some branches flourish, bearing fruit of wisdom, justice, and creativity. Others wither, burdened by corruption, violence, or despair. The leaves of the tree shimmer with possibility, each leaf representing a life lived within the vast canopy of time. When a leaf falls, its essence returns to the roots, feeding future growth. This metaphor suggests that nothing is lost in the passage of time. Even the failures of the past nourish the potential of the future. The writings proceed to describe the structure of time in more intricate detail. They propose that time is divided into layers: visible time, hidden time, and sacred time. Visible time is the ordinary flow of days, seasons, and years. Hidden time consists of moments that pass unnoticed, yet contain profound potential, like seeds waiting to sprout. Sacred time is described as a state that transcends ordinary experience, moments when the boundary between the seen and unseen grows thin. During sacred time, events acquire heightened significance, choices carry greater weight, and revelations become possible. These distinctions might seem esoteric to modern minds, but to ancient people, they provided a lens through which to interpret the irregularities of life, the sudden turning points, the inexplicable intuitions, the occasional sense that time itself pauses to allow for transformation. Another text describes how individuals move through these layers of time. It suggests that most people live primarily within visible time, their awareness shaped by routine and familiarity. But some, mystics, prophets, dreamers, or those struck by sudden insight, occasionally step into hidden time. In these moments, a person may glimpse patterns not yet manifest, feel the approach of significant events, or perceive connections invisible to ordinary perception. Such experiences often come through dreams or moments of profound stillness, as though the mind briefly aligns with the deeper rhythm of creation. Sacred time, however, is portrayed as rare and overwhelming. It erupts into ordinary life with the force of a storm, reshaping the trajectory of individuals and communities. The ancient writers claim that moments of sacred time lie behind the great turning points of history, the callings of leaders, the rise of movements, the spark of revolutions, and the revelations that alter the course of civilizations. A related set of writings delves into the concept of temporal resonance, the idea that certain moments in history mirror others, creating echoes that guide the unfolding of events. In this vision, time is not linear, but reflective. A moment of injustice in one era reverberates into the next, prompting a response that seeks to correct the imbalance. A moment of compassion generates a resonance that inspires acts of kindness centuries later. According to these texts, the universe maintains equilibrium through these resonances, ensuring that no action, whether virtuous or destructive, remains without consequence. This perspective transforms history from a random sequence of events into a dialogue across ages, a complex interplay of cause and effect spanning generations. The writings also explore the concept of veiled time, periods during which the true direction of history becomes obscured. During veiled time, the signs that guide human understanding become clouded. Prophets receive visions that are difficult to interpret. Leaders make decisions based on incomplete information. Societies experience confusion, uncertainty, and a sense of impending change. The texts describe veiled time as a necessary phase, a cocoon in which transformation occurs unseen. Just as seeds germinate in darkness before breaking through the soil, societies must pass through veiled time before emerging into clarity. These periods are often accompanied by upheaval, conflict, or dramatic shifts in power. Yet the writings insist that veiled time is not a punishment, but a preparation. One of the more dramatic accounts describes an ancient figure who experiences a sudden collapse of temporal boundaries. While meditating near a river at dusk, he feels the air grow dense and the light shimmer as though bending around him. In an instant, he finds himself standing in a place where time flows differently. He sees scenes from his childhood unfolding beside possibilities for his future. He hears voices from ancestors he never met, and glimpses the faces of descendants not yet born. The experience overwhelms him, leaving him breathless and disoriented. When he returns to ordinary time, he is forever changed, aware that his life is only one thread in a vast tapestry stretching in both directions. The vision teaches him that time is not a wall dividing generations, but a membrane through which influence passes. The decisions of the present shape the opportunities of the future, just as the wisdom and mistakes of the past shape the conditions of the present. This perspective encourages humility, responsibility, and awareness. The writings present this experience not as a singular event, but as an example of what is possible when the veil between temporal layers thins. Another set of forbidden writings discusses the guardians of time, not in the sense of deities controlling destiny, but as sentinels who maintain the balance between temporal layers. These guardians are described as beings of perception rather than force. They observe the flow of time, guiding individuals toward moments of alignment or away from paths that would lead to disruption. Their influence is subtle, shaping intuition, coincidences, and chance encounters. The writings portray them not as controllers but as protectors of harmony, ensuring that the unfolding of history remains coherent, even when human actions threaten to fracture it. One text describes a guardian appearing to a traveler lost in the desert. The traveler, disoriented by heat and exhaustion, believes he is nearing death. Suddenly, a stranger appears, offering water and guiding him toward the nearest settlement. The traveler survives, but when he later searches for the stranger to express gratitude, no one has ever heard of such a person. The text suggests that the guardian intervened not to save an individual life, but to preserve a thread of history connected to the traveler's future actions. This account reflects the ancient belief that certain lives carry particular resonance, and that their preservation is essential to the unfolding of temporal patterns. In another account, a guardian appears not as a person, but as a dream. A young woman preparing to undertake a journey dreams of a bridge collapsing under her feet. The dream is so vivid that she delays her departure. Days later, she learns that the very bridge she intended to cross has fallen. The text presents this not as prophecy, but as intervention, a moment in which hidden forces reshape the flow of time to protect a life whose future significance must be preserved. These accounts reveal the ancient belief that time is not indifferent. It responds, shifts, and adapts, forming pathways that align with deeper patterns of creation. The writings then turn to the idea of fractures in time, moments when the fabric of temporal order becomes unstable. These fractures are described as rare but profound, occurring during catastrophic events, intense spiritual upheaval, or transitions between cosmic cycles. During these fractures, the boundaries between past, present, and future become porous. People report seeing visions of events not yet occurred, or experiencing memories that do not belong to them. Animals behave erratically, weather patterns become unpredictable, and communities sense an intangible tension. The texts argue that such fractures do not happen without purpose. They serve as warnings, opportunities for course correction, or gateways to transformation. One vivid narrative describes a village that experiences a temporal fracture during a period of drought. As the villagers gather to pray for rain, the sky darkens, not with clouds but with flickering images, scenes from ancient conflicts, future constructions, unfamiliar faces. The villagers fall to the ground in fear, believing they are witnessing the unraveling of reality. But the text explains that the fracture serves a purpose. It reveals the interconnectedness of their actions with the larger flow of time. The drought, it suggests, is not merely a meteorological event, but a symptom of deeper imbalance. When the villagers respond with unity, compassion, and renewed commitment to their values, the fracture heals and rain begins to fall. The writings conclude with reflections on the nature of destiny. They present destiny not as a fixed path, but as a spectrum of possibilities shaped by alignment with the rhythms of time. Each person, they claim, carries a unique temporal resonance, a pattern of potential that unfolds through choices, experiences, and relationships. Destiny is not imposed from outside, but emerges from within, guided by the interplay between individual will and the deeper currents of existence. The ancient writers emphasize that while certain moments carry more weight than others, every decision contributes to the shape of the future. In their final words, these forbidden texts offer a message both humbling and empowering. Time is not a force that carries humanity blindly forward. It is a living, responsive dimension that interacts with human consciousness. The world is not confined to the present moment, but is part of a vast continuum stretching across ages. And within this continuum, every life, every action, and every moment participates in the unfolding story of creation. The ancient writers, reflecting on these truths, invite readers to consider their place within this grand tapestry. They remind us that the rhythms of time are subtle yet powerful, that hidden patterns shape our world even when we are unaware, and that moments of clarity, rare and fleeting, offer glimpses into the deeper structure of reality. In this vision, humanity is not a passive observer, but an active participant, entrusted with the responsibility to navigate the currents of time with wisdom, courage, and awareness. In the final layer of forbidden writings, deeper than the chronicles of sages, visionaries, travelers across unseen realms, and interpreters of cosmic rhythms, there lies a body of reflections unlike any other. These writings do not speak of kings or prophets, nor of celestial beings or spiritual guardians. Instead, they turn inward, toward the nature of humanity itself. They ask a question so vast, so unsettling, that even ancient scholars approached it with trembling reverence. What does it mean to be human in a world alive with mystery, shaped by forces both visible and unseen? These texts seek not to define humanity by its limitations, but to reveal the hidden potential that lies dormant within every mind and heart, waiting for the moment when the veil lifts and truth emerges with startling clarity. One such writing begins with an image of a solitary figure standing on the edge of a cliff at dawn. The horizon glows with the first hint of light, yet the world below is still shrouded in darkness. The writer describes the figure as suspended between night and day, between ignorance and understanding. This image serves as a metaphor for the human condition, caught between the finite and the infinite, capable of grasping moments of revelation, yet forever reaching for more. The text suggests that humanity's greatest power is not its ability to build, conquer, or analyze, but its capacity to wonder. Wonder, it claims, is the spark that ignites the search for meaning, driving individuals to explore realms beyond the immediate and the known. From this foundation, the writings explore the dual nature of human existence. They describe humanity as both grounded in physical reality and tethered to the unseen. Every breath, every thought, every dream becomes a bridge between dimensions. The ancients believed that humans possessed a unique resonance, a harmonic pattern capable of aligning with the deeper rhythms of creation. When this alignment occurs, they argued, individuals can perceive truths hidden from ordinary sight. These moments might manifest as sudden insight, profound intuition, or a sense of connection that transcends time and space. The writings insist that such experiences are not anomalies, but reminders of humanity's true nature. One text recounts the story of a craftsman who spends his life working with wood and stone. Though his hands are calloused and his days long, he occasionally experiences fleeting moments when his work seems guided by an intelligence beyond his own. Lines appear more perfect than his skill should allow. Forms emerge with a clarity he cannot explain. In these moments, he senses a presence moving through him, shaping the material with purpose. The text presents this not as supernatural intervention, but as alignment. The craftsman's inner rhythm synchronizing with the deeper patterns of creation. These moments, though brief, ignite in him a profound sense of fulfillment, convincing him that every act of creation participates in a larger tapestry. Another account describes a young woman who spends her nights gazing at the stars, feeling a pull she cannot articulate. The constellations seem to whisper to her, not with words, but with impressions that stir her imagination. One night, as she watches the sky, she experiences a sudden shift. The stars appear brighter, the patterns more vivid. She feels as though she is seeing them for the first time, not as distant lights, but as beacons connected to her own existence. In that moment, she understands that the universe is not separate from her, but intertwined with her being. The text uses her story to illustrate the ancient belief that contemplation can open doorways to understanding, revealing truths that logic alone cannot access. The writings then turn toward the human struggle, a theme woven through every generation. They describe the tension between fear and courage, despair and hope, fragmentation and wholeness. Humans, the texts argue, live in a constant state of becoming, shaped by choices, experiences, and relationships. This process is not linear, but cyclical. Individuals encounter challenges that push them toward growth, only to face new struggles that drive deeper introspection. The ancient writers portray this struggle not as failure, but as refinement. Just as metal must be purified through fire, so must the human spirit be shaped by adversity. The texts emphasize that suffering, though painful, can awaken dormant strength, clarity, and compassion. One poignant narrative recounts the journey of a healer who travels through war-torn regions offering comfort to the wounded. She witnesses unimaginable horrors, yet she refuses to turn away. Each act of healing becomes a testament to her belief that compassion can restore balance in a broken world. But as her journey continues, she begins to doubt her purpose. The suffering seems endless, and her efforts appear insignificant against the vastness of destruction. One night, overwhelmed by despair, she collapses beside a ruined well. As she sleeps, she dreams of a vast field filled with countless small lights flickering in the darkness. A voice tells her that each light represents an act of compassion, hers and those of others across time. These lights, though small, form a constellation of hope that guides humanity forward. When she awakens, she feels renewed, understanding that her role is not to end suffering, but to illuminate the path through it. Another writing explores the nature of memory. It describes memory not as a static archive, but as a living force that shapes identity, relationships, and destiny. Memories can empower or imprison, depending on how they are held. The text tells the story of a man haunted by past mistakes. He believes he cannot change, that his failures define him. Yet one day, he meets an elder who teaches him that memory is like clay. It can be shaped, reinterpreted, and integrated into a larger narrative. The elder explains that memories gain meaning through the stories individuals choose to tell about them. This teaching transforms the man's understanding, allowing him to view his past not as a chain, but as a foundation upon which he can build anew. The forbidden writings then shift toward the concept of interconnectedness. They propose that every individual exists within a web of relationships that extends beyond the present moment. Actions ripple outward, influencing people near and far, seen and unseen. The texts compare humanity to a vast forest in which each tree is connected beneath the surface by an intricate network of roots. When one tree suffers, the others sense the imbalance and respond with nutrients, shelter, or support. The writings argue that humanity, too, possesses an underground network, an invisible system of empathy, intuition, and shared experience. This system allows individuals to sense when others are in pain, to feel compelled to help even when no benefit is gained, and to form bonds that transcend logic. Another set of writings explores the nature of creativity, describing it as one of the most sacred expressions of humanity. Creativity, they argue, is the mechanism through which the human spirit transforms the potential of the unseen into tangible form. Whether through art, music, invention, storytelling, or scientific exploration, creativity acts as a bridge between worlds. One text tells the story of a sculptor who believes his work is meaningless. He carves figures from stone, but no one praises his skill or seeks his creations. One day, a traveler stops to admire a statue that the sculptor considered his least impressive work. The traveler explains that the statue reminded him of someone he lost long ago, helping him feel both comfort and grief. The sculptor realizes that creativity is not measured by acclaim, but by impact. The forbidden writings use this story to highlight the ancient belief that creative acts resonate far beyond their immediate context. The texts then confront one of humanity's most persistent questions: the search for purpose. They suggest that purpose is not a singular, static object to be discovered, but an evolving relationship between an individual and the world. Purpose emerges through action, reflection, and connection. One writing compares purpose to a flame that must be tended, not a treasure waiting to be found. The flame grows brighter when nurtured by curiosity, compassion, and resilience. It dims when neglected, ignored, or overshadowed by fear. The writings urge readers to view purpose not as a destination, but as a living process, shaped by the choices that align individuals with the deeper rhythms of creation. The forbidden texts also explore humanity's longing for transcendence, the desire to rise above the limitations of physical existence. They portray this longing as universal, woven into the very structure of the human soul. This longing manifests in different ways: in the pursuit of knowledge, in acts of courage, in artistic expression, and in moments of profound silence when individuals feel connected to something greater than themselves. One writing recounts the experience of a hermit who spends decades in solitude, seeking enlightenment. He endures storms, hunger, and loneliness, yet he remains committed to his search. One morning, as he sits in meditation, he feels a sudden warmth in his chest, followed by a sense of expansion. He perceives the world not as separate from him, but as part of a single, breathing entity. This moment, though brief, becomes the culmination of his lifelong journey. The text uses his story to illustrate the ancient belief that transcendence is not attained through escape, but through presence, through deep engagement with the self and the world. Another theme running through these writings is the human relationship with mortality. Rather than portraying death as an end, the texts describe it as a transition, a doorway into another dimension of existence. They urge readers to view mortality not with fear, but with curiosity. One writing tells the story of an elder who gathers his family as he feels his life nearing its conclusion. Instead of speaking about regrets or accomplishments, he shares a vision he experienced in a dream. In the vision, he stands at the edge of a vast ocean. On the shore behind him lie the memories of his life, and in the waters ahead shimmer the possibilities of what comes next. The elder explains that death is not a fall into darkness, but a step into a greater expanse. The texts do not claim to know the exact nature of this expanse, but they emphasize that the transition is natural and inevitable, part of the same rhythm that governs all creation. The writings then address the challenges of the modern world. Though written in ancient times, their insights appear eerily prescient. They describe societies overwhelmed by noise, speed, and distraction. People lose themselves in constant motion, disconnected from the deeper rhythms that sustain them. The texts warn that when humanity becomes consumed by external pursuits, it risks forgetting its inner nature. They urge readers to reclaim stillness, to cultivate awareness, and to listen for the subtle whispers that arise when the mind grows quiet. These whispers, they insist, are the voice of the unseen calling individuals back to themselves. One passage describes a traveler who visits a bustling city filled with noise and confusion. He feels overwhelmed by the chaos, struggling to maintain his sense of identity. But then he enters a small garden hidden between two buildings. In the garden, he hears the faint sound of water trickling over stones. The simple rhythm calms him, reminding him of the deeper pulse of creation. The passage uses this moment to emphasize the importance of cultivating spaces of silence and reflection, even in the most chaotic environments. The forbidden writings also explore the concept of awakening, moments when individuals suddenly perceive reality with clarity, breaking free from illusions that once confined them. Awakening is described as both exhilarating and disorienting. It often arrives unexpectedly, triggered by crisis, insight, or profound encounters. One writing tells the story of a merchant who loses everything in a fire. Devastated, he wanders through the ruins of his life. But in his grief, he begins to notice details he had long ignored: the resilience of plants sprouting between stones, the kindness of strangers offering assistance. Slowly, he realizes that his identity was never rooted in possessions but in connections. This realization becomes his awakening, allowing him to rebuild his life with new purpose. The writings conclude with a powerful assertion: that humanity carries within itself the seeds of transformation. These seeds sprout when individuals align with the deeper rhythms of creation, when they embrace wonder, cultivate compassion, honor their interconnectedness, and seek meaning through presence rather than ambition. The texts insist that humanity is capable of great destruction, but also of profound restoration. The choice between these paths lies not in external forces, but in the collective heart of humanity. In their final lines, the forbidden writings offer a vision of hope. They describe a future in which individuals awaken to their true nature, recognizing the sacredness of life and the interconnectedness of all beings. In this future, humanity does not transcend the world by escaping it, but by participating in it with awareness, humility, and love. The writers do not claim that this vision is inevitable. They present it as a possibility, a direction toward which humanity can move if it chooses to listen to the deeper rhythms that have guided creation since the first dawn. The last sentence of the final text is a whisper across centuries, a message intended for all who seek meaning amid uncertainty. You are not separate from the mystery you seek. You are part of its unfolding.